Hello, hello. Welcome back to Let's Talk Ray Bradbury, the show here on Let's Talk Entertainment, where, going back to 2018, I've been attempting to read and review each of the roughly 600 short stories written by the late, great Ray Bradbury. Today, we're up to story number 290, which also happens to be the 6 of 21 short stories in the collection that I'm currently exploring, which is Driving Blind from 1997. Today's story is called Remember Me, with a question mark. If you're new to the channel, the way that these reviews work is I do a very brief synopsis of what happens in the story, and then I wrap it up with just a very light analysis of what I took away from this story. And I mainly do this for my own entertainment, but I'm happy to learn that on occasion some of you people find these videos, and you find them useful as well. So, today's story, one day, while crossing the middle of a street, on vacation in Florence, Italy, a man walks up to our story's protagonist, Leonard Douglas, and he's like, "You remember me?" And he's insistent that he should remember who he is. And finally, he reveals that his name is Harry Stadler, and he is his butcher from way back home, where they're not really friends. Harry Stadler, the butcher, insists that they meet later for dinner, and so all throughout the day, Leonard decides that I really need to cancel this. So he keeps calling his hotel, but he can't get a hold of the guy. So ultimately, he finds himself going out to dinner with this guy. They sit down to eat, and it's become very apparent really quickly that they have nothing in common. The butcher is very hypercritical of what he decides to order on the menu to eat and drink, talking about how the taste of this drink will ruin the taste of this meat, and you should get your meat rare instead of well done. And it's all very annoying. Somebody sort of micromanaging this experience. But it becomes quickly clear that they have nothing in common, and they're really having a miserable time. Leonard, the butcher, near the end of the meeting, begins to suggest that perhaps they should meet at home and sort of discuss their vacations afterwards. But he quickly thinks better of it because he realizes, too, that they have nothing in common and they're probably never going to meet again. But ultimately, they order some more drinks, they get laughing, they get having a good time, and it's actually not a bad memory. And they sort of imagine themselves telling this story for years to come as if it was a better experience than it actually was, which is sort of how stories do grow with the telling. You know, rose-colored glasses, I guess, would be the thing. Okay, so this is a very minor little comedy, but it is about a simple observation that is pretty true to life. This happens to most of us. We're somewhere, unexpectedly, somebody says, "Hey, remember me?" And for the life of us, we cannot remember their name. And I'm pretty bad with names and faces, so this happens to me more often than I probably should. And it's a little bit awkward because I'm not really a social person by nature. At least not generally. Under certain circumstances, I've discovered that I'm not actually so much of a loner as I think I am. It's just I don't do small talk very well, so I'm sort of very awkward in those situations. I'm awkward on camera as well. But when I get talking about something I really enjoy and really love, and you get somebody who is willing to sort of listen and also contribute to the conversation, it's very easy for me to get overboard by, showing my excitement, my enthusiasm for the topic. But generally speaking, I relate more to Leonard here, who found himself sort of very confused and awkward about this situation of being approached by none other than his butcher from his small town back home. And that butcher sort of feeling like he knows the person better than he really does. And I think that's a very real situation. There's an old lady who's been selling me beer at the local beer store for years. We come in, and then a couple times a week or whatever, and we start talking, and it's almost like you're holding a conversation like one line at a time over many weeks and months. And very infrequently, I'll see these people out and about in the wild, as it were, and you realize that you don't actually know them, and you don't necessarily recognize them as easily out of uniform. In the case of the butcher, he's usually covered in blood, wearing an apron, and he's always, sort of behind the counter. So it's a very different situation than seeing him in Florence, Italy. But it doesn't have to be anything so exotic as that. It can just be a matter of, meeting somebody in the business at the checkout line versus out and about, living like real people, outside of work. Because I find that work, whereas some people always talk about the glamour of a career, for most people it's a job, and it doesn't really define them. So yeah, there it is. Remember Me? Yeah, not really. Not a bad little story. I mean, it's not wonderful. I mean, it's delightful, but it's the kind of story that you don't need to read again necessarily. It's no wonder that it's not among Ray Bradbury's most famous stories. I completely understand that. But at the same time, it takes a special author, I think, to tell these sort of little inconsequential stories, but do it so well, and really to pick apart all these little different parts of the human condition, what he did so well in his lifetime. Many of his, I just call the story not that good, but it's probably not necessarily the best description of what I'm trying to say here. But the thing is, he wrote a lot of stories that are sort of little consequence to people because they're not earth-shattering, but he had a way of illuminating these little tiny situations, these little tiny parts of the human condition so well. And, you know, today you wouldn't get them published. You know, nobody would publish them professionally. You'd have to be self-published because it's like the world doesn't have any time for these sort of little stories. Not everything can be groundbreaking, earth-shattering, but sometimes you have to tell stories that are just little nuggets of the human condition, which is certainly the case of Remember Me. All right then, next time we'll be looking at a story called Fie Foe Fum, which is the 7th of 21 short stories as we quickly approach the halfway point of Driving Blind. Thank you, and I'll see you again soon.